your decision making is going to be absolutely at another level. As product owners, it's very helpful to understand how to think about and measure the results that you're getting from your team, and in particular, how that relates to the product that you're building. And I think probably most people have heard that there are some good ways to do measurement and there's some not so good ways to do measurement as well. So I want to just start with three things that basically, as a product owner, are core metrics or KPIs that you always want to measure if you can. And these are return on investment, time to market, and customer satisfaction. These three metrics are not necessarily easy to measure. And, in your organization, you may need to get outside help from, your finance folks or from your tooling people or what have you to be able to measure them. But I want to go over them very quickly and discuss why they're good metrics and why you as a product owner should be looking at them and trying to measure them. So return on investment, in many ways, this is an obvious one. Your team is spending money at the very least through the labor effort of your team members, but possibly in other ways as well. And that money spent should ideally result in a net positive return, that the value that your team is delivering to the product and to the stakeholders and customers and users is worth more than the time and money that they're spending as a team. So as a product owner, ideally you measure this, or at the very least have a sense of it, even if it's not formally measured, every sprint. So that means understanding and knowing how much it costs for you to run your team every sprint, and having some sense of the business model, the business case for the product increment that you're going to be working on in that sprint. In some cases, it's really obvious and easy to say, yeah, this is worth everything. Of course, we're going to do this. But especially as you get further and further along in a product development effort, sometimes the marginal improvement in value that you're delivering may not be worth it. And you need to be able to share that and make that transparent with your stakeholders. So ROI is hard to measure if you don't know the cost of your team, of course. It's also hard to measure if you don't have a direct connection to what your product is actually doing. But I want to give you a couple simple clues about this. Most organizations have a standard, fully loaded rate that they sort of use for budgeting for every person in the organization based on their role. And so, or their level in the organization. There's a few variations on that, but usually you can find that rate fairly easily, or you can even estimate it yourself. Like if you have a local staff that are, highly paid software developers, for example, you can typically guess that your organization is spending about $150,000 to $200,000 a year for each person like that. Again, geography matters. There's a whole bunch of factors, but it's not usually that hard to get some good estimates. Even a little Google search can help. Likewise, on the value side, what business value are you delivering? There's usually some things that you can find. For example, if your product is designed to make an existing process more efficient, then you can often measure the value in terms of time saving, right? Say you have, 1,000 people in your customer service department, and the product is meant to help, reduce error rates and save time so that every customer service agent takes 1 hour less per week of work to do the same work, then that can be easily translated into a financial benefit for what you're building. There's lots of sophisticated ways to do ROI, including taking into account things like your discount rate. In other words, how much return on investment your organization expects to get. Those are advanced things. We're not going to get into the details of it, but if you do some research about ROI, you can learn that stuff too. Time to market. This one's a little bit more subtle. So time to market is actually a statistical measurement that is based on individual measurements. And so what you're trying to track here is from the moment there's a customer request of some sort to fix something, to build something, to add a new feature, to, solve a piece of friction in your system, whatever it is, that moment is when the clock starts ticking. And then the moment that you actually deliver it back to the customer or the user in production, that's when the clock stops ticking. But of course, requests come in many different forms and sizes. Some requests are simple fixes, some are big projects. And so you also have to take into account the type of request. So when you do this, you want to look at all the requests over a period of time. Usually you would take some sort of trailing average and measure the average time to market for these requests. By the way, requests can also come internally. So it might be a marketing department doing some research and discovering that there's an unmet need, and they create a ticket in your system. That is also an example of a customer request, but it's more abstract because it's done through research rather than someone, phoning you up and saying, "Hey, I want this," right? So time to market is a measure of competitiveness. And basically, you want to figure out ways to look at the whole stream of work that happens between the request and the delivery and try and find efficiencies, ways to reduce the time there and speed that up. So smaller time to market is better. Time to market is a measure of competitiveness because basically the faster you can respond to your customer requests or the market opportunities, the more likely you're going to gain market share or be able to charge more for your services. The automation of long-term processes and repetitive processes is a huge way to make big wins in this. And then lean thinking is a big topic all on its own, but it helps you find where are the wasteful activities that you're doing and figure out ways to reduce the amount of time you spend in those wasteful activities or eliminate them altogether. As a product owner, time to market is often very difficult to measure because often you're working, again, just with a single Scrum team that might be only taking care of a very small part of the overall process to go from a customer request to deployment. So as a product owner, one of the things you need to do here is you need to work with your Scrum Master and the surrounding organization to get some transparency and visibility into that stuff. And again, you might have to go to the organization to figure out what kind of tooling there is involved. If your organization is just using Jira for your teams, but they have some other ticketing system for, customer support and marketing and so forth, being able to get the data out of those tools and see that time to market, again, often takes a little bit of work. Time to market is also in some ways conceptually very simple, but I really want to emphasize this idea that it's a statistical measure. It's not something that you can just look at one specific measurement and go, oh, our time to market is good, because there's going to be variability in that, and you need to sort of have a trailing average. If you get more sophisticated, there is something called a cumulative flow diagram that can also help you understand your time to market. This is something that I'm not going to go into the details, but just if you're interested in researching this, cumulative flow diagrams are a way of looking at your historical time to market and then starting to make some predictions about the future as well. Okay, so then the third metric that I strongly recommend is customer satisfaction. And this is at a high level a measure of quality. So customer satisfaction can be measured in a lot of different ways. Obviously, everyone's seen, for example, things like Netflix's thumbs up, thumbs down, stuff like that. or star ratings on, Google. There are more sophisticated ways to do this. So a very common way to do this is something called the Net Promoter Score. There's even some dispute about whether that's a good one, but the basic idea of Net Promoter Score is you do a survey of your customers. Now, in a Scrum environment, this might be done in the sprint review, for example. So you give everyone access to a little online survey, and it has a simple question, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to someone else? And anyone who gives you a 9 or a 10 is a promoter. Anyone who gives you a 7 or less is a demoter, and 8s are neutral. And basically, you just want to calculate what's the proportion between promoters and demoters. And you want it to be positive, obviously, and ideally highly positive. So you want most people to respond with 9s or 10s. Now, Net Promoter Score, there are some arguments about its effectiveness and usefulness. But customer satisfaction is fundamentally a very qualitative metric anyway. So the real issue is making sure that you treat it statistically as well, that you don't just go off of a single person's response to your survey, but you look at long-term trends, that you have large enough sample sizes, and so forth. One slightly more sophisticated way of doing customer satisfaction is something which is called fit for purpose scoring. And this takes more analysis and more time. I just want to mention it. I'm not going to go into detail about how it works, but there is a great book called Fit for Purpose, which I strongly recommend if you're interested in, exploring how to measure customer satisfaction more effectively. Again, just like with time to market, the statistical aspect of this is important. So if you measure it sprint by sprint, what you're really trying to do is make sure that you have enough people responding to your customer satisfaction surveys, and that you have the ability to do trend analysis, that you look sprint to sprint to sprint to sprint to see how things are trending. And just like with time to market and ROI, you want to try and have some measurement of this every sprint and specifically for your team. So as a product owner, making decisions about what's going to be in the future, you need to have this data to make good decisions, right? Being a product owner means being a business person making business decisions to maximize business results. You can't make good decisions if you don't have good data. So getting these three metrics, ROI, time to market, and customer satisfaction in place is extremely important. If you don't have those currently, honestly, you should go back to your team, go back to your Scrum Master and say, this is a huge impediment for me right now. And get your Scrum Master to help you to resolve this impediment. Don't let them give up. Don't let them say, oh, we can't measure that or something dumb like that. Insist that this is your number one impediment and we need to put this into place as quickly as possible. That might mean collaborating with accountants, finance department, executive, procurement, vendor management. Like there's all sorts of places depending on the type of work that you're doing. Marketing, sales, customer support, IT. There's lots of possibilities about how this leads into discussions with different parts of your organization. But once you do get these into place and have measurements every sprint, suddenly your decision making is going to be absolutely at another level and you're going to be much more effective as a product owner.